All right, letting you know right out the gate, this video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build your online presence and run your business. Going to talk about that a little later, but first, let's talk about Marvel's What If, a series on Disney Plus where I talked about the first episode, then didn't talk about any other episodes. And the reason for that is every one of the Marvel series I've enjoyed in one way or another, but at about episode 4 or 5, every time I get this feeling of like, I gotta do that video today. I kind of don't want to feel obligated to do that video on that episode of that show today. So I was like, all right, let's just binge it at the end. And I did. And I enjoyed the fact that I did it that way. So now in one video, as villains say, in one fell swoop, I talk about all of it. Out the gate, spoiler warning, gonna get spoilerish talking about this because when I talk about shows, sometimes I like doing that. This isn't gonna be a play-by-play, it's not gonna be a deconstruction. This is gonna be one of those videos where it's like 78 things you missed in every episode. Not just my thoughts, but it's gonna get a little spoilerish. Now you know that. And the show ended up being exactly what it seemed like it was going to be from the pilot episode, which is a series of short stories. It felt like a novel where the novel's made up of a series of short stories that's what it is. Granted, by the end, there is a thread that ties it all together. It's like, oh, okay, so it was actually leading up to this. Like the T'Challa episode where it's T'Challa Star-Lord. Not gonna lie, it hits ya. Chadwick Boseman voices T'Challa in here, you know? You feel it. You're like, oh, dude. You forget that he's gone. The soothing nature of a voice is a very strange thing. It's funny how a voice can make you forget about the reality you live in. It was actually cool forgetting about that. And T'Challa wasn't just in that episode. There were a few episodes he was in. But what I like most about What If is what you see in a lot of these episodes where it's like one change drastically changes the effects of the entire universe or that reality. Ian Malcolm 101, and also a philosophy that completely predates Ian Malcolm. Point is, because T'Challa was Star-Lord, now Thanos didn't, he's like, I'm not going to snap everyone to death, but still going to talk about it over some drinks. Because T'Challa was Star-Lord, Thanos took a different route. Then we see Nebula when she's not just completely messed up. It's neat to see these what if curveballs, these hypotheticals thrown out there, which I guess aren't hypotheticals, they're realities in a different universe. But for the sake of the MCU, unless they're brought into the actual cinematic universe, they remain more or less hypotheticals. We'll see when Kang shows up how much of this actually bleeds over. I don't know. But episode 3 was interesting for me because that's when I started to see the difference between old MCU and new MCU in terms of the humor. Because in episode 3, you had scenes from old MCU. Hawkeye's up there and he has a bow and arrow, like, all right, I can take out Thor. Or the guy going for the hammer because we don't really know who he is yet. And they start making jokes about Thor's hair and how he smells like lavender. And I was like, that dialogue wasn't in the MCU in that movie, but here it is now. Really showed the difference between old MCU and new MCU, and it irritated me. I don't know, I'm a sucker for continuity, I guess. I get it's a different universe, but that's not why they did it. They did it so it would feel like the MCU now. And it just made me miss the MCU of old, where they took shit seriously sometimes. Episode 4 was great, where Doctor Strange was like, I need to save Rachel McAdams' life. And he keeps going back and trying to do it, but he can't. It's not the first time I've seen it in entertainment at all. So Doctor Strange is like, I'm gonna steal life essence and steal souls and eventually look like the Howling Man from the Twilight Zone. I really like that episode. It's like the MCU, again, accidentally made one of the more compelling MCU villains. Which in terms of writing and production, when these things go into production, I feel like Shang-Chi started production before What If did. Which means they were like, hey, we really like that villain arc of a villain doing the wrong things for love, and that makes him a villain, so we'll just make Doctor Strange do that. The zombie episode, what my big takeaway is with the zombie episode? They have their base suspended by Spider-Man's webbing. The webbing that dissolves in a couple hours. Not a smart plan. Regardless, yeah, Marvel zombies. But this is one of those moments where What If, the fun thing about What If is you can just throw out really anything you want. You can do some really fun creative things. But you do still have to make things within context and characters. So the fact that Vision's taking people and feeding them to Wanda, to zombie Wanda, I was like, would Vision do that? I don't think he would do that. Also, Marvel's really found a stride of people doing the wrong things for love here. It's kind of like they're like, sweet, that's a zone. People like that. Never deviate. And as much as I can say, I don't think Vision would do that. In Spider-Gwen, the comic books, Matt Murdock was essentially the Kingpin. I thought that was cool. I didn't read enough of the comic books to get to the point where they might have elaborated as to how and why that happened in his life, but I thought it was a neat thing. So it lends itself to comic books. If this was a comic book, I suppose I wouldn't question it too much. I'd be like, well, obviously something happened in the past. But I suppose when you're watching it in motion, you know, whether it be animated or live action, for some odd reason in my brain, I'm like, well, I require a reason. So I suppose it would help me to mentally keep it in the mindset of like, well, it's a short story, like a comic book. You can just roll with it. I mean, it's the same with Hank Pym. Hope died on a mission for S.H.I.E.L.D., and Hank Pym snaps and becomes the Bumblebee, or what's this? Yellow Jacket. So he's wiping out the Avengers. You see it in his eyes. You're like, dude, you've gone mad. You're like crazy old man eyes, Hank Pym. I don't know. It's just like his wife gets lost in the quantum realm and he's like, yeah, I'm sad, but there's hope yet. I'll actually gear my daughter up at the end of the movie to go out there and possibly die. His daughter dies on a mission of S.H.I.E.L.D. He's like, fuck it, I'm the Bumblebee, fuck the Avengers. Thor with no Loki was a cartoon. It was one of those episodes where I was like, you could have done anything. Thor without a brother, because I always got the feeling that Thor, you know, he was kind of party mischievous Thor, and then he had his arc of like, hey, become better in the Thor movie. And then he did, and you could argue that having Loki as opposition made him step up and be a better person. But also having Loki as a brother made him not take things seriously. So he's like, oh yeah, I'm Thor, I'm awesome. Hey, who needs responsibility? So not having Loki as a brother, you could have done anything. And they were like, hey, let's have dude bro party Thor. Why not? And I feel like they were trying to play up the whole comedic tone that Thor Ragnarok brought to the Thor character. Essentially making Thor in the MCU the Thor that was in those, what was those, it was a YouTube show or webisodes where he's like working out and he was like, that's a brain, that's a brain, that's a brain. Like any novel of short stories, what if, as some short stories are just better than others. That one, I was just like, I don't need to ever watch that one again. With the Tony Stark episode, I was most interested when it was like, oh, the hero Iron Man never got made, so Tony Stark actually starts going the way of villainy. That was really compelling, and then Killmonger kind of takes him out and takes over. And then Killmonger does exactly what Killmonger did in Black Panther. Bring the body of Claw and then become Black Panther, and all right, there we go. It's like, I feel like I've seen this before. Episode 8 and 9 is where things start to get connected. You know, those episodes work together as one episode. Also, it pulls back from the other episodes like, hey, we gotta assemble a team, the Guardians of the Multiverse. But the what if is, what if Ultron had won? And, well, no, he didn't pick up the lands and then drop the lands like a meteor. No, he just set off a bunch of nukes. Probably a better plan. My one thought, though, is when Ultron's there, he's in Vision's body, you know, he has the Vision body, and Thanos walks through with all but the Mind Stone, and he goes, fascinating. He just cuts him in half. I was like, wait, I didn't think about that before. Could Vision have just done that if his girlfriend wasn't trying to, you know, break his head? That'd have solved a lot of problems there. But it gets to the point where Ultron's like, I've done it, I've succeeded, I feel like I have no purpose because of that. Does he start a family? No, that would be ridiculous. No, he takes on the Watcher of the Multiverse, which is the part of me that's like, why did you do that? Could you see everything? Because the Watcher's like, oh, I can't interfere. And I feel like Ultron would be like, all right, good talk. Have fun watching me fuck shit up. Because Ultron engaged him, I guess he did interfere. Could Thanos sense the Watchers and fight him since he had all the stones? I mean, he didn't. He was like, nah, I'm just gonna snap and garden. Regardless, for the finale, the Watcher goes back and pulls the greatest team, which definitely is not the greatest team. This isn't the strongest team you could have gotten. I mean, of all the multiverse, this is the best you got. I don't know. I suppose it's what we had from the show. You're telling me dude bro Thor is more efficient than whatever dickbag Thor might be out there? But maybe the Watchers, like Kurt Russell from Miracle.
I'm not looking for the best players, Craig. I'm looking for the right ones.
You could always say that, where it's like, no, the Watcher knows what's gonna happen. He knew this was the team that would get it done. That's why it's so hard to talk about this. Like, well, why didn't he? Because you're dealing with this being that has that power. But in the end, it just looks like the writers didn't want to go that route. It's the writers. Those are the real gods of the show. I suppose it's just me going through it. That's why I titled these things My Thoughts. But in the end, like, what if was fine. Like, if it was a week-to-week thing, it would never consume my week. It's not like I'd be like, oh, dude, I can't wait until the next episode of What If. But, you know, binging it all when it's all wrapped up and just seeing this hypothetical short stories, or not hypothetical, actual realities among the multiverse. Which I guess you could argue all hypotheticals are. I enjoyed it just fine. I mean, Obviously not enough for me to be like, yeah, I definitely want to do episode to episode, week to week videos on it. They do a good job with the voices. When you have the voices from the MCU movies, it's really cool. When it's not the voices, it's generally speaking pretty noticeable, but they did a good job. Like Tony Stark with the writing of the character, I was actually impressed with some of his quips. I was like, yeah, it does sound like Tony Stark. Those are my thoughts on Marvel's What If. The biggest hurdle Marvel has to overcome for me is the resolution I felt at the end of the Infinity Saga. Endgame was literally my endgame. Everything else after that with Marvel is, well, I enjoy it as fun extra. But before we go, once again, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace sells over 200 top-level domains so you can find the perfect name for your website. Buying a domain from Squarespace is simple with no hidden fees. You can present videos from YouTube, Vimeo, and Animoto on your Squarespace site. And as always, I dig the fact that every design automatically comes with a unique mobile experience that matches the overall style of your website. I mean, it's 2021. That mobile experience integration is essential. So go to squarespace.com for your free trial, and when you're ready to build that empire, click the link below. Go to squarespace.com/JeremyJohns. Get yourself 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain using promo code JOHNS. And thank you once again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I do appreciate it. All right, so Marvel's What If. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever you thought, comment below. Let me know. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.